When NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal and his wife walked into an exclusive Hollywood theater, they expected a night of entertainment. Instead, they were met with humiliation, denied their rightful VIP seats by a man who believed money couldn't change who truly belonged. But Shaq didn't argue or make a scene. He made a power move no one saw coming. In days, he exposed an industry built on exclusion, silent discrimination, and unspoken rules of power. As Hollywood elites tried to shut him out and a trusted ally betrayed him, the fight for justice became a battle for control. Now, with the world watching, Shaq isn't just fighting for a seat. He's changing the entire theater. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about rewriting the rules so no one else has to fight for their place again. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The city of Los Angeles shimmered under the glow of neon signs and flashing cameras. Outside the majestic Regal Theater, a long stretch of red carpet led to the grand entrance, where paparazzi clicked away at arriving celebrities. The air was electric with excitement, the scent of expensive perfume mingling with the distant aroma of buttered popcorn. From the moment Shaquille O'Neal stepped out of his custom black Rolls-Royce, the energy shifted. Towering above the crowd at 7 feet 1 inch, dressed in an immaculately tailored navy blue suit, he was a presence impossible to ignore. Beside him, Shawnee Henderson, in a sleek floor-length emerald gown, looked radiant. They moved as a power couple, respected, admired, and accustomed to the world of exclusivity. Photographers yelled Shaq's name, fans screamed for autographs, and reporters stretched their microphones out, eager for a word. But Shaq, ever the gentleman, simply smiled, waving briefly before focusing on Shawnee. "This is nice," she whispered, slipping her hand into his. "We don't do this enough." Shaq nodded. "I know, baby. Tonight's about enjoying ourselves." They walked up the steps, past velvet ropes and into the theater's grand lobby. The majestic Regal was not just any venue, it was one of Hollywood's most exclusive theaters, reserved for industry elites, A-list actors, and high-ranking executives. Marble floors gleamed under the chandelier's glow, and uniformed staff bustled around, catering to the night's biggest stars. At the concierge desk, a host greeted them with a polished smile. "Mr. O'Neal, welcome. Your seats are waiting." A young usher, Daniel, barely out of his teens, eagerly took their tickets and led them down the plush-carpeted aisle toward their VIP section. The theater was nearly full, the excitement palpable as guests settled into their seats, whispering about the night's big premiere. Shaq and Shawnee reached their designated front-row VIP seats, positioned perfectly in the center. Daniel stepped aside, motioning toward the chairs. "Enjoy the show, Mr. O'Neal." Just as Shawnee moved to sit, a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, ma'am," came the voice. "I'm afraid these seats are reserved for VIP guests." Shaq turned, his easygoing demeanor stiffening slightly. Standing before them was Connor Whitman, a tall, well-dressed man in his late 40s. His expression was one of forced politeness, his posture rigid. Everything about him screamed entitlement. Shawnee furrowed her brows, glancing at the ticket in her hand. "These are our seats." Connor barely spared her a glance before shifting his attention to Shaq, his smile a little too tight. "I apologize, sir, but this section is for our high-profile guests. We have plenty of excellent seating in the secondary VIP area." Shaq studied him for a long moment. His presence alone should have been enough for Connor to recognize who he was speaking to. But that wasn't the problem, and Shaq knew it. "Connor, right?" Shaq's voice was smooth, calm, but there was a weight to it. Connor straightened, clasping his hands behind his back. "Yes, sir. I'm the venue's operations manager. I'm sure you understand we have strict seating policies. This area is reserved for our most distinguished guests." Shawnee scoffed, disbelief flashing in her eyes. "Are you saying we're not distinguished enough?" Connor's expression didn't change. "I'm saying there's been a misunderstanding." Shaq exhaled slowly. He had dealt with subtle racism before, the kind where people acted like rules were rules, except the rules weren't the same for everyone. "No misunderstanding here," Shaq said, his voice still level. "These seats were assigned to us. We were invited. I'd appreciate it if you let us sit." Connor's forced smile thinned. Around them, guests had begun stealing glances, pretending not to watch while clearly listening. The tension in the air thickened. "I'm sorry, sir, but I must insist. If you'd like, I can have a staff member escort you to a more appropriate section." Shaq's jaw clenched. His hands, usually relaxed, curled into slow, measured fists at his sides. Not out of anger, he never let emotions rule him, but out of disappointment. He wasn't surprised. That was the worst part. Shawnee, however, wasn't as composed. "Oh, so now you're going to escort us? Like we don't belong here?" Connor's voice dropped slightly, his fake politeness slipping. "Ma'am, please don't make this difficult." Difficult? The word lingered in the air like a slap. Shaq took a step forward, towering over Connor. Not threatening, just present. "I don't think we're the ones making this difficult," he said, his voice a low rumble. A security guard had now approached, shifting uncomfortably. Other VIP guests, including actors and producers, watched with mild curiosity, though none intervened. Shaq could see the choice before him. Push back publicly and make a scene, or step away and let this moment pass. Shawnee sighed, her anger giving way to sad familiarity. "Shaq, let's go." He didn't want to. Not because of ego, not because of pride, but because he knew exactly what was happening here. They weren't being denied because of status or mistake. They were being denied because some people still believed money, success, and power didn't erase the color of your skin. He nodded once, a short, deliberate movement. "All right," he said, voice cool. Turning to the security guard, he added, "Make sure Connor here gets me a full refund." Connor's smirk twitched, but before he could respond, Shaq turned and walked away, Shawnee beside him. The whispers behind them grew, some uncomfortable, others quietly amused. They had been humiliated, and some people in that theater enjoyed it. But Shaq didn't feel defeated. He felt something else entirely. Something simmering just beneath the surface. Something that told him this wasn't over. As they walked back to the lobby, passing glittering chandeliers and elegantly dressed elites, Shawnee sighed. "You okay?" Shaq gave a small, tight smile. "Yeah." But in his mind, a plan had already begun forming. Tonight, Connor thought he won. He had no idea who he had just messed with. The ride home was quiet. Los Angeles glittered outside the car's tinted windows, neon lights casting fractured colors on Shaq's face. He stared out, jaw tight, his massive hands resting on his knees. Shawnee sat beside him, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, the kind of silence that spoke volumes, the kind that carried the weight of unspoken truths. Finally, Shawnee exhaled, breaking it. "You okay?" Shaq didn't answer right away. He knew the question wasn't just about tonight. It wasn't just about some arrogant manager in a suit who thought money changed everything, but still saw them as less. This was about something bigger. Something that had been there his whole life, lurking in the background, even when he thought he'd outrun it. He turned to Shawnee. "Are you?" She gave a sad, knowing smile. "This isn't new, Shaq. It's just louder this time." He looked away, his mind churning. Shawnee sighed, rubbing her temples. "You know what bothers me the most? The way people enjoyed it." Shaq's hands clenched involuntarily. He had seen it too. Some guests had looked away, shifting uncomfortably, pretending they didn't notice what was happening. Others had smirked, entertained by the humiliation. Not enough to cheer, but enough to savor the moment. And Connor Whitman. The way he had spoken, the way he had held his ground with zero fear of consequences. That was what gnawed at Shaq the most. Connor had known exactly who Shaq was, had known his power, his money, his influence, and still had the audacity to humiliate them. Because in Connor's world, the rules were different. In Connor's world, people like him never lost. Not really. Shaq exhaled slowly, resting his head against the car seat. His mind drifted back, far from the bright lights of LA, to his childhood in Newark, New Jersey. A deep-cut flashback. The year was 1984. A young Shaquille O'Neal, barely 12, stood on the cracked pavement of his neighborhood basketball court. The air was thick with summer heat, the scent of asphalt and sweat filling his nostrils. He had just won a pickup game, towering over the older boys, outplaying them like it was nothing. His mother, Lucille O'Neal, stood nearby, arms folded, watching with that look she always had. The one that said she was proud, but also waiting for him to understand something deeper. As Shaq walked toward her, beaming from the win, she spoke. "Respect isn't given, baby. It's taken." Shaq frowned, confused. "But they respect me. They know I'm the best." Lucille knelt to his level, resting a firm hand on his shoulder. "Nah, son. They respect what you can do, not who you are." Shaq blinked, the words sinking in, but not fully landing yet. Lucille sighed, looking around the neighborhood. The run-down buildings, the broken streetlights, the way people hustled to survive. "One day you'll be big. Bigger than this place. Bigger than these courts. You'll have money, fame, all of it. But let me tell you something, baby. No matter how high you climb, some people will still try to put you in your place. They'll smile while they do it too." Shaq swallowed. "Then what do I do?" Lucille's grip on his shoulder tightened just slightly. "You don't ask for respect. You take it. You make it so they can't ignore you." End of flashback. The car came to a stop outside their estate in Beverly Hills. Shaq blinked, pulled back into the present. The words of his mother, spoken decades ago, echoed in his chest like a drumbeat. He stepped out of the car, walking slowly toward the front door. Shawnee followed, watching him closely. "You're thinking something," she said. It wasn't a question. Shaq didn't answer right away. He just stood there, staring out at the darkened skyline, feeling something shift inside him. The old Shaq, the athlete, the entertainer, the smiling giant who let things roll off his back, would have let this go. He would have shrugged, laughed it off, moved on. But tonight was different. Tonight, something deeper had been triggered, a reminder of what his mother had taught him all those years ago. Shaq took a breath. "I'm not letting this go." Shawnee studied him. "What are you going to do?" He didn't know yet. Not fully. But one thing was certain. Connor Whitman thought he won tonight. He had no idea what was coming next. The world moved on as if nothing had happened. Theaters continued selling tickets. Celebrities continued attending premieres. The majestic Regal Theater remained a shining symbol of Hollywood's elite. The night of the VIP seat incident faded from the headlines before it even became one. But Shaquille O'Neal hadn't moved on. He hadn't erupted in anger that night. He hadn't caused a scene. That wasn't his style. Instead, he had walked away, quiet but not defeated. Because Shaq knew something most people overlooked. Real power wasn't in reacting. It was in planning. The next morning, he sat in his home office, flipping through his phone, scrolling past sports updates and business emails, his mind still stuck on Connor Whitman's smug face. The man had been too comfortable, too sure of himself, because he knew he was untouchable. Shaq leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping against his desk. If this had happened to him, one of the most recognizable athletes in the world, how many others had been treated the same way? That's when the idea struck him. Shaq wasn't going to let this slide. He was going to dig deeper. His first move was subtle but deliberate. He made a few calls, private investigators, real estate contacts, financial analysts. He didn't just want to know about Connor Whitman. He wanted to know who owned the majestic Regal Theater, who funded it, who really pulled the strings. It didn't take long for information to start rolling in. The theater was part of an exclusive chain, Regal Crown Entertainment, high-end venues across the country, all catering to an elite clientele. The surface numbers looked clean, the profits solid. But Shaq knew how to read between the lines. There were patterns, subtle but unmistakable. Reports of black customers being stopped more frequently by security. Complaints about seating mix-ups that disproportionately affected minority guests. Internal hiring records that showed very few black employees in upper management. It was a system designed to keep certain people in their place. Shaq sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had seen this before. Different names, different industries, but always the same game. It wasn't just about one night or one arrogant manager. This was bigger, and if he was going to take this on, He needed someone who knew how to play the game from the inside. Shaq didn't do press unless he had a reason to. That's why it raised eyebrows when he requested a private meeting with Zane Calloway, an investigative journalist known for exposing corruption in corporate America. Zane wasn't the kind of reporter who covered celebrity scandals or NBA trades. He was the kind that dug into dirty secrets and didn't stop until the world paid attention. They met in a low-key cafe in downtown LA, away from paparazzi and industry insiders. Shaq arrived early, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses, blending in as much as a 7-foot-1-inch man could. Zane walked in a few minutes later, a tall, lean man in his late 40s, sharp-eyed and carrying a notebook tucked under his arm. He sat down across from Shaq, studying him for a moment before speaking. "Didn't expect a call from you," Zane said. Shaq smirked. "Didn't expect to make it." Zane leaned forward. "You here to talk about Regal Crown Entertainment?" Shaq raised an eyebrow. "You already know?" Zane pulled out his notebook, flipping through pages. "I've been tracking them for years. Racial bias in hiring, customers profiled, investors tied to old money institutions that have been keeping people out of their spaces for decades. It's all there, just not loud enough for people to care." Shaq nodded, feeling something settle in his chest. He had been right. This wasn't just a one-time thing. Zane tapped his pen against the table. "Tell me, Shaq, you planning on going public with this?" That was the question. Shaq had the power to take this story to the world. A press conference, a viral post, a call to action. He could blow this wide open. But that wasn't always the best way to win. "I don't know yet," Shaq admitted. "Public means attention, but it also means they see me coming. And when people like that see you coming, they find ways to shut it down." Zane studied him, then nodded slowly. "Smart man." Shaq leaned in. "I don't just want headlines, Zane. I want change." The journalist's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Then let's make sure we hit them where it hurts." The deeper Shaq and Zane dug, the more disturbing the patterns became. Some of Regal Crown Entertainment's top executives had histories of discriminatory policies in past businesses. There were whistleblower reports, employees who had tried to speak out but were silenced. Shaq sat in his office, documents spread out in front of him. He had enough evidence to ruin reputations, force board resignations, and cause a media firestorm. But was that the best move? He drummed his fingers on the desk, staring at a photo of Connor Whitman, the man who had dismissed him so easily that night. Connor wasn't the real power. He was just a face, a puppet. The real power was the people behind him, the ones who never got their hands dirty but made sure the rules were always tilted in their favor. Shaq took a deep breath. The next move had to be calculated, precise, because this wasn't just about one night in a theater. This was about rewriting the rules of the game. Connor Whitman prided himself on being one step ahead. For years, he had operated in exclusive circles, ensuring that his theaters remained pristine, elite, and carefully curated. He wasn't just a manager, he was a gatekeeper, enforcing unspoken rules designed to maintain a very particular kind of clientele. And now he had a problem. The moment he learned that Shaquille O'Neal was digging into Regal Crown Entertainment, his stomach tightened. A powerful celebrity investigating his theater? That was bad for business. Connor moved quickly, calling upper management, whispering to investors, and reaching out to crisis PR teams. His instructions were simple. Handle this before it turns into a problem. By noon the next day, damage control was in full swing. Emails were scrubbed. Internal complaints were reevaluated. Employees were given strict talking points in case anyone asked questions. At first, Connor thought he had managed to contain the issue. But then something happened that he never saw coming. An anonymous whistleblower leaked an email, one that Connor had carelessly sent to his staff just hours after humiliating Shaq at the premiere. The email was short, but damning. Handled an issue at last night's event. Some people think money makes them VIPs, but class can't be bought. You can dress up a clown, but it's still a clown. The words spread like wildfire. The moment the email hit social media, the internet exploded. Classgate started trending. Some people were outraged, calling it blatant racism and classism. Others rushed to defend Connor, claiming it was just a misunderstood joke or that Shaq was overreacting. News anchors debated it on morning shows. Celebrities started taking sides. Podcasts dissected the issue. One post in particular stood out, a simple tweet from a young black filmmaker who had once been denied entry to a Regal Crown event despite holding a valid VIP pass. Happened to me too. They smiled while doing it. They always do. Shaq sat in his office, scrolling through post after post. The stories flooded in. It wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel less than, who had been denied access, dismissed, or humiliated, not because of who they were, but because of what others saw when they looked at them. Shaq exhaled, setting his phone down. His hands rested flat on his desk, his mind steady. This was no longer about personal pride. This was bigger than him, and he was done letting it slide. The world didn't see it coming. While social media argued, headlines debated, and corporate executives whispered behind closed doors, Shaquille O'Neal was already 10 steps ahead. He wasn't here to play defense. He was here to change the game entirely. In the dead of night, while the rest of Los Angeles slept, a multi-million-dollar deal was being finalized. Shaq sat in his home office, surrounded by monitors, financial reports, and a quiet but powerful team of attorneys, investors, and business strategists. The air in the room was thick with tension, but Shaq himself was calm, focused. Because this wasn't just business, this was personal. The plan had come together quickly but strategically. Regal Crown Entertainment was valuable, but not untouchable. Like many corporate giants, it had weak spots, investors who were unhappy, internal disputes over revenue allocation, and a boardroom full of people more loyal to their wallets than their morals. And Shaq? Shaq knew exactly where to apply pressure. Through a combination of personal wealth, high-level investors, and private equity backing, he did something that sent shockwaves through Hollywood overnight. He bought the entire theater chain. Industry shockwaves and corporate panic. The news broke at 7 a.m. sharp. Shaquille O'Neal acquires Regal Crown Entertainment in stunning business move. NBA legend turns media mogul. What this means for Hollywood. The man they tried to humiliate just bought them out. The media exploded. Talk show hosts scrambled for commentary. Business analysts dissected the logistics. Celebrities reacted in real time. And inside the Regal Crown headquarters, absolute chaos erupted. Conference calls were scheduled in a panic. Emails flew between board members, executives, and financial backers. Investors, caught off guard, demanded to know how Shaq had pulled this off so quickly. Connor Whitman sat in his office, staring at his computer screen in complete disbelief. This wasn't possible. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. An emergency meeting was called later that afternoon. The Regal Crown Board of Directors gathered in their sleek, glass-walled conference room, now operating under new ownership. Connor entered the room late, sweating beneath his crisp navy blue suit. His mind raced with excuses, justifications, anything he could say to save himself. But the moment he stepped inside, he froze. Because at the head of the table, in the chairman's seat, sat Shaquille O'Neal. Cool, collected, powerful. He leaned back, his massive frame making the oversized leather chair look small. The room was dead silent, every executive watching, waiting, knowing exactly what was coming. Shaq didn't rush, didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. He simply slid a document across the table. Connor, you know what this is? Connor's hands trembled as he picked it up. He skimmed the words. Termination notice, immediate effect. His heart dropped. No, wait, Connor started, voice desperate. This isn't necessary. I've been with this company for years. I know how things work. I can be an asset. Shaq cut him off, his voice smooth. Yeah, I'm sure you do. That's the problem. Connor's face flushed red. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked around the room, searching for support. But the executives, many of whom had once laughed at his little VIP seat stunt, refused to meet his eyes. They weren't going to fight for him. Not against Shaquille O'Neal. Connor swallowed hard, realizing what this meant. He wasn't just losing his job. He was done. Blacklisted. A man with his reputation wouldn't find another high-profile position in the industry again. He had mocked the wrong man. And now, he was paying the price. Back at home, Shawnee Henderson sat on the patio, scrolling through the latest news articles on her phone. The sun cast a warm glow over their sprawling estate, but her focus was elsewhere. She had known Shaq for years. She had seen him win championships, seen him dominate courts, crush business deals, and turn setbacks into stepping stones. But this was something different. This wasn't about money, power, or proving a point. This was about changing the system from the inside. When Shaq stepped outside, she put her phone down and studied him for a moment. He was calm, but she could see the weight behind his eyes. He sat down beside her, running a hand over his bald head. Shawnee exhaled, shaking her head. "You really did it." Shaq chuckled. "Yeah, guess I did." She swallowed hard, emotions bubbling to the surface. Not because of the money, not because of the power shift, but because he had taken pain and turned it into something bigger than himself. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm proud of you." Shaq met her gaze, his expression softer now. "I just did what had to be done." A pause. Then Shawnee smirked. "So, does this mean I can sit anywhere I want now?" Shaq laughed, deep and full. "Baby, you own the whole damn building." For the first time in days, Shawnee truly smiled. Because they hadn't just won. They had rewritten the rules entirely. The press conference was set for noon sharp, but by 10 a.m., the crowd had already swelled beyond control. Outside the majestic Regal Theater, the very place where Shawnee had been humiliated, cameras lined the streets. Journalists pushed forward for position, and a growing number of supporters gathered, some holding signs, others just wanting to witness history unfold. The air buzzed with anticipation. Hollywood executives, actors, business moguls, everyone had their eyes on this moment. Because this wasn't just a press conference. This was a reckoning. Shaq stepped onto the outdoor podium, dressed in a sharp, understated black suit. His presence alone was enough to command silence, but the real weight came from the purpose behind his words. He adjusted the mic, scanning the sea of faces in front of him, some supportive, some skeptical, some just waiting to see what would happen next. Then he began. "I want to make something clear before I say anything else." His voice was calm, steady, deliberate. "This isn't about money." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the intensity in his eyes. "This is about respect, dignity, and what we accept as normal." He let that settle for a moment before continuing. "A week ago, my wife and I walked into this theater as paying guests, like anyone else. But we were told, in not so many words, that we didn't belong. That no matter how much money, success, or history we had, the rules were different for us." Shaq's voice never wavered, but there was an edge to it now. "And when we walked out that night, I made a decision. A decision that I wasn't just going to be angry. I wasn't going to complain, make a statement, or start a hashtag." A slight pause. "I was going to change the game entirely." That's when he turned, gesturing toward the massive gold-plated Regal Crown Entertainment sign behind him. "Which is why, as of today, this theater, and every theater under Regal Crown Entertainment, belongs to me." The crowd erupted. Inside the corporate headquarters of Regal Crown Entertainment, Connor Whitman watched the press conference unfold on a massive TV screen. His face was pale. He had already been fired, but this was worse. Because Shaq hadn't just removed him, he had exposed him. A montage of security footage from the night of the incident flashed across news stations. Clips of Connor blocking Shawnee, dismissing Shaq, smirking while belittling them. Then came the leaked email. "Handled an issue at last night's event. Some people think money makes them VIPs, but class can't be bought. You can dress up a clown, but it's still a clown." The backlash was instant and unforgiving. By mid-afternoon, Connor's LinkedIn was wiped, his past employers scrubbing his name from their sites, and reports surfaced that he was blacklisted from high-profile management positions. And just like that, the man who had once guarded the gates of exclusivity found himself locked out. Back at the press conference, Shaq wasn't done. He stepped forward, holding a folder in his massive hands. "This isn't just about owning these theaters. It's about what comes next." He flipped open the folder, scanning the document before holding it up. This is a diversity and inclusion initiative, one that guarantees a percentage of ownership in this company will go to Black and minority-owned businesses in the entertainment industry. The reaction was instant. Some gasped, others broke into applause. This industry has been built on exclusion, on keeping certain people out of the room, off the red carpet, and behind invisible walls. That ends today. His next words came slow, measured. I didn't buy this theater to own it. I bought it to change it. The crowd erupted once more, but Shaq wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. Because for him, this wasn't a win. This was just the beginning. The moment Shaq made his move, the world reacted. For days, the media couldn't talk about anything else. News anchors analyzed his historic acquisition. Business insiders speculated on his next steps, and social media turned him into a symbol of power, justice, and disruption. But not everyone was celebrating. There were people, powerful people, who had spent decades ensuring that the entertainment industry remained exactly as it was. People who didn't like change, especially when it came from someone they couldn't control. And Shaq? He had just challenged the entire system. The backlash came quietly at first. Whispers in boardrooms, closed-door meetings, carefully placed rumors. Some Hollywood executives started calling him difficult. Others used words like reckless, unpredictable, and a troublemaker. They said he was too emotional for business. They questioned whether he was really capable of running an empire. And behind the scenes, there were more calculated moves being made. Major film studios, some of which had partnerships with Regal Crown Entertainment, suddenly reconsidered their deals. Production companies delayed contract renewals, citing uncertainty in the market. Even some of his longtime sponsors, corporations that had once lined up to be associated with him, began to distance themselves. It was a coordinated effort, a reminder from the old guard that power had consequences. They were trying to push him out, trying to make him regret what he had done. But they had underestimated one thing. Shaquille O'Neal didn't scare easy. Shaq knew there would be resistance. What he didn't expect was that the most dangerous attack would come from someone inside his own circle. His longtime financial advisor. A man who had helped him navigate multi-million-dollar deals, guided his investments, and always seemed to be one step ahead when it came to protecting his wealth. Or so Shaq thought. Late one night, Shaq's legal team uncovered something alarming. A leak. Confidential financial details about his purchase of Regal Crown Entertainment had been leaked to industry insiders. The information wasn't just private. It was strategically damaging. Someone had intentionally fed documents to the press, making it seem like Shaq's acquisition had been rushed, risky, and unstable. The goal? To shake investor confidence, force him into a corner, and pressure him into selling at a loss. And when Shaq traced it back to the source, one name stood out. The realization hit hard. This wasn't just business betrayal. This was personal. The next morning, Shaq called Daniel to his office. The atmosphere was heavy, cold. Daniel walked in, his usual calm, collected expression in place. But there was something else there now. A hint of guilt, a flicker of unease. Shaq didn't waste time. Tell me why, he said, his voice low but firm. Daniel exhaled, adjusting his tie. It wasn't personal, Shaq. It was business. The investors. Shaq cut him off. Number, don't give me that. He leaned forward, towering over the desk. You leaked my financials. Tried to put me in a bad deal. That's not business. That's betrayal. Daniel shifted in his seat. Look, I was protecting you. You don't know how ruthless these people are. You don't win by fighting them, Shaq. You win by playing the game their way. Shaq's jaw tightened. That's the difference between you and me, he said. You think I need to play their game. He leaned back, his voice even. I'm changing the game. Silence. Then Shaq slid a folder across the desk. Daniel hesitated before picking it up. The moment he saw what was inside, his face drained of color. It was a termination contract, effective immediately. Daniel swallowed hard. You don't want to do this. Shaq held his gaze. I already did. Shaq didn't react out of anger. He planned his next move carefully. Instead of defending himself, he went on offense. That night, He sat down for a live interview with one of the biggest journalists in America, an exclusive, no-holds-barred conversation about his vision, his power move, and the corruption he had uncovered. He didn't just talk about the theater industry. He exposed how systemic discrimination worked in elite spaces, how it wasn't just about seating policies, but about who controlled the narrative, who held power, and who got to make the rules. And he made it clear. They don't like me owning this because I'm not the kind of owner they can control. They want me to sell. They want me to back down. But I didn't come this far to play by their rules. His words hit hard. The interview went viral within hours, sparking a new wave of public support. Celebrities, athletes, activists, they rallied behind him. And those Hollywood executives who had tried to push him out, now they were the ones on the defensive, because Shaq had just turned their whispers into a national conversation. By the end of the week, the entire industry had shifted. The sponsors who had distanced themselves, now they were scrambling to be back in Shaq's good graces. The executives who had tried to block him, now they were publicly backpedaling, trying to spin their way out of controversy. And as for the people who doubted him, the ones who had called him just an athlete, a businessman who had no place in Hollywood, now they saw him for what he truly was. Not just a former NBA star, not just a businessman, but a force of real, undeniable change. Connor Whitman had spent the past month in hiding. After being publicly fired, humiliated, and blacklisted from high-profile management roles, he had become a walking symbol of elite prejudice and corporate downfall. His name had been dragged through the mud on news outlets, social media, and business circles alike. He had lost everything: his job, his reputation, his power. And for the first time in his life, there was no safety net. The whispers in high society circles weren't about how to help him land on his feet. They were about distancing themselves from him. He was a liability, a cautionary tale. The very people who had laughed at his jokes, shaken his hand and called him one of us, had left him to rot alone. But the worst part? For the first time, Connor saw the truth. He had spent years believing he had earned his position, that his success was built on his intelligence, hard work, and ability to manage luxury spaces. Now he understood the real reason he had been so comfortable in those boardrooms. He had been given a head start. He had been protected by an unspoken system that made sure people like him never had to prove themselves the way others did. And when that system no longer had use for him, they discarded him like he was nothing. One morning, without warning, Connor did something that no one expected. He went on national television. Clean-shaven, dressed in a simple navy suit with no arrogance, no smugness, just a man who looked like he had stared into the abyss and didn't like what he saw. The interviewer wasted no time. "Mr. Whitman, the world saw what happened. You lost everything after the leaked emails and your behavior at the theater. Do you feel like you've been unfairly punished?" Connor didn't blink. Number I deserved it. A pause, a shift in the atmosphere. "I won't sit here and say I didn't know what I was doing that night," Connor continued. "I did. I knew exactly what I was doing. I've spent years in these spaces, telling myself the world was fair, that some people just didn't belong, that it was business, that it wasn't my problem." He took a deep breath. "I was wrong." The interviewer leaned forward. "You're saying this wasn't an isolated incident?" Connor shook his head. This was a pattern. Not just from me, but from the entire system that runs these spaces. It's not about money. It's about who is allowed to belong. The silence in the studio was thick. Even those who had defended him in the beginning were now forced to reckon with the fact that this wasn't just a man caught in a bad moment. This was bigger than him. "I'm not making excuses," Connor said finally. "I was a gatekeeper. I kept people out. I justified it to myself. And I enjoyed the power that came with it. But power built on keeping others down? That's not real power." The apology went viral instantly. Some called it damage control. Others said it wasn't enough. But Shaquille O'Neal? He saw something else. That night, Shaq sat on his private balcony, watching the city lights of Los Angeles stretch endlessly beneath him. His phone was blowing up. Texts, emails, calls. Everyone wanted to know what he thought about Connor's apology. He had expected an apology eventually. What he hadn't expected was that Connor would admit to the entire system being rigged. Most people, when exposed, tried to minimize their actions. They blamed stress, misunderstandings, or cultural shifts. But Connor? He had told the world, yeah, it's real. I was part of it. And it's wrong. Shaq tapped his fingers on the armrest of his chair, his mind working through the possibilities. He could ignore it. Let Connor fade into obscurity, let the world decide his fate. Or he could do something no one would see coming. The next morning, he made his decision. Connor Whitman was staying at a small rented apartment in downtown LA when his phone rang. The caller ID made his stomach drop. Shaquille O'Neal. He stared at the name for a long moment before answering. Hello? Shaq's voice was calm but firm. Come to my office, tomorrow, noon. Then he hung up. Connor sat there, heart pounding. No threats, no yelling, just an invitation. The next day, Connor stepped into Shaq's corporate office. The very same place where so many industry executives had once dismissed Shaq as just an athlete. Now, Shaq sat at the head of the table, the new owner of Regal Crown Entertainment, exuding the kind of power that didn't need to be announced. Connor stood there, feeling small. Shaq gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Connor obeyed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Shaq finally leaned forward. Why'd you do it? Connor swallowed. Because I finally saw it, and I couldn't unsee it. Shaq studied him. And what happens now? Connor shook his head. I don't know. Shaq exhaled. I do. He slid a folder across the desk. Connor hesitated before picking it up. When he opened it, he froze. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a warning. It was a job offer. Connor's head snapped up. What? You heard me, Shaq said. I don't believe in canceling people. I believe in accountability. You said you finally see how deep this runs? Connor nodded slowly. Good, Shaq said. Then fix it. Connor's breath caught. You're serious? Shaq nodded. But you're not walking into another executive job. No titles, no power trips. You're going to start from the bottom, work your way up the right way, and prove you can actually build something instead of just guarding the door. Connor's fingers tightened around the papers. His entire life, he had thought power was about status. Now, sitting across from Shaq, he realized true power was in doing the right thing when no one expected you to. He nodded. I won't waste this. Shaq leaned back, watching him. We'll see. The news broke that evening. Shaquille O'Neal had offered Connor Whitman a second chance, under one condition. He had to earn it. The world reacted immediately. Some called Shaq a genius. Others said he was too forgiving. But Shaq didn't care about opinions, because he understood something that most people didn't. True power wasn't in destroying your enemies, it was in turning them into allies. A year had passed. The world had moved on, as it always did, chasing the next scandal, the next big story. But inside the majestic Regal Theater, the change was not just visible, it was undeniable. Gone were the days of silent discrimination, of unspoken rules that kept certain people outside looking in. Now the theater was a model for inclusivity and equal opportunity. It wasn't just a business anymore. It was a statement. When Shaq had taken over Regal Crown Entertainment, people expected him to treat it like a business venture, make some noise, shift a few policies, then quietly step away when the industry pressure got too strong. But Shaq didn't do half measures. He had rebuilt the entire structure of the company, from the executive level to the employees working the front lines. New policies ensured that VIP access wasn't based on exclusivity, but experience. No more hidden barriers. No more quiet discrimination disguised as mistakes. Hiring practices changed too. More Black, Latino, and underrepresented voices now held positions of power. Promotions were based on merit, not connections. For the first time in the company's history, minority-owned businesses had direct stakes in the entertainment chain, ensuring that wealth wasn't just circulating among the same elite circles. And Connor Whitman? He had kept his word. After spending months starting from the bottom, working hands-on in different departments, Connor had proven himself. Not as an executive, but as someone willing to understand what real work looked like. Now, he sat quietly in the back of the theater, no longer the gatekeeper, but someone who finally knew what it meant to belong. The evening was warm, the sky painted in streaks of orange and purple as Shaq and Shawnee pulled up to the majestic Regal Theater. This time, there was no tension, no silent battles to fight. They weren't just guests anymore. They were the owners. As they stepped onto the red carpet, there were no security guards stopping them, no whispers behind their backs. Instead, there were smiles, nods of respect, and a sense of belonging that should have been there all along. Shawnee squeezed Shaq's hand, glancing up at him. "Feels different this time, huh?" Shaq chuckled. "Yeah. This time every seat in here is a VIP seat," she smirked. "So, does that mean I finally get to pick where I sit?" He grinned, wrapping an arm around her. "Baby, you can sit wherever you want." They walked through the grand entrance, past the gleaming lobby, and into the new heart of the theater, a space where, for the first time, everyone belonged. As the movie started, Shaq leaned back in his seat, watching something far more important than the film on the screen. He saw families of all backgrounds sitting together. He saw kids laughing, eyes wide with wonder, no one worrying about whether they were allowed to be there. He saw a culture that had changed, not by force, not by anger, but by rewriting the rules of power. This wasn't just a theater anymore. This was his legacy. The fight for real change doesn't stop here. Shaq didn't just take a stand. He rewrote the rules. But how many industries, businesses, and institutions are still keeping people locked out? How many voices are still silenced, talents overlooked, and doors quietly closed? Now, it's your turn. Share this story, start the conversations that matter, support businesses that champion inclusivity, and challenge the spaces that still operate on unspoken rules. Because real power isn't just about winning, it's about making sure everyone gets a seat at the table. Are you in?